Okay, so let's try and unpack this a bit. Imagine, if you will, a time when community rules were, well, laid out with just incredible precision.
Really specific.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even down to something like how long could you actually hold on to a piece of cloth? Seems strange, right? So today, our deep dive takes us right into the heart of ancient Buddhist monastic law. We're exploring this really fascinating set of regulations that actually emerged from some very human challenges.
Indeed. And for this deep dive, we're really digging into excerpts from Nissaggiya 3MD, which is a specific section of the Vinaya.
The Vinaya being the foundational code.
That's right, the code of discipline for Buddhist monks. And it gives us this unique window, into the practical day-to-day life and also the evolving legal thinking of these early monastic communities.
Okay, so our goal today really is to pull out those fascinating nuggets of insight from this ancient text. We want to get beyond just what the rules were and really understand why they came about. What do they tell us about, say, managing resources or intentions and just the whole dynamic of community life back then? Let's jump in.
All right, so our story kicks off in Savatthi at the Jetavana Monastery. And the whole thing starts with a very kind of practical problem for one particular monk.
Mm-hmm.
He gets what's called an akala kivara, an unseasonable robe.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, what does unseasonable actually mean here?
Well, the text tells us the robe is napahoti, which basically means it's not finished, it's not complete. Or maybe there just isn't enough material yet to finish it.
Oh, okay.
So you picture this monk, he's repeatedly smoothing it out, adjusting the fabric, maybe trying to stretch what little he has, or perhaps just waiting, hoping for more material to arrive.
And this is where things get interesting because the Buddha actually observes this monk, constantly fiddling with this unfinished robe.
He asks him, "Why are you doing that?" And the monk explains his struggle, like, "Look, I got this unseasonable robe, but it's just not finished."
And then the Buddha asks about something called kivara pakasa.
Kavara Pakasa.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is really a crucial concept. It translates roughly to having an expectation or maybe a hope for more robes or specifically more material to actually complete the one he already has.
And the monk says?
The monk confirms, yes, he does have this expectation. He's waiting for more.
Okay, so initially the Buddha's response is actually quite compassionate, pragmatic even.
Very much so.
He allows monks to accept these akalakiva, these unseasonable robes, and store them if they have this genuine expectation that they'll be able to finish them.
So it's a seemingly simple allowance, really born from a practical need.
Yeah, it really shows how the early community was trying to solve real everyday problems, not just, imposing rigid rules from day one.
Exactly.
But as tends to happen, right? A new rule, even one meant well, can have consequences nobody really planned for. So what happened next?
Well, precisely. Monks started interpreting this allowance, shall we say, quite broadly.
Uh-oh.
They began receiving these akala kavara and just storing them for akira kanasi, which means for more than a month.
More than a month. Okay.
Yeah, and the text even mentions they were bundled up and left in the kavaravais, which sounds like some kind of dedicated robe room or maybe a communal robe rack, just sitting there.
And this is where Ananda comes in. Now, he was a key disciple, right? Known for being quite observant.
Extremely observant, yes. Ananda notices these bundles of robes just left there, unused, for this extended time. And his role here is quite telling, isn't it?
How so?
Well, it suggests a culture where people felt responsible for looking out for potential issues, for the collective well-being. Ananda doesn't just shrug it off.
What does he do?
He expresses pretty strong displeasure. The text uses words like ujayati kiyati vipatetu. It conveys real annoyance, disapproval, that these robes are just being kept for so long, basically dormant. And he takes it to the Buddha.
He reports it. And the Buddha's reaction?
It's pretty swift. He confirms Ananda's report is true, and then he actually reproaches the monks involved. He calls them mogapurisa.
Which means?
Foolish persons. Yeah. It's quite a strong rebuke.
Wow. So this raises the question, why was just storing robes for, a bit over a month such a big deal? It seems so specific, but the reaction is quite intense.
It's a great question. And this whole incident, the monk's broad interpretation, Ananda spotting it, the Buddha's reaction, It directly led to them creating a new, much more specific rule, a sikapada, a training rule.
Tighten things up.
Exactly.
Yep.
The goal was clearly to prevent this kind of situation, this potential abuse or misunderstanding from happening again, and importantly, to make sure communal resources were actually being used, not just hoarded.
Okay, so how did they refine the rule? This is where that incredible precision comes back in, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So the core of the refined rule goes like this. First, the context matters. It applies after the main robe season is finished, the hitavasmi, and after the kahina ceremony is done, upatasmi kahime.
That's the annual robe-making event.
That's the one. So after all that, if an akalakavara, an unseasonable robe, arises, and that could mean it comes from the sangha, a group, relatives, friends, even rags found on a dust heap, or maybe using one's own wealth.
Okay, various sources.
Right. The monk can accept it if they want, a kakamanina bageta ba, but here's the key part. After accepting it, it must be made quickly. Kipam eva karataba.
Quickly meaning?
Specifically, within 10 days. Tasa karataba.
10 days? That's pretty fast.
It is. But there's a crucial bit of nuance here. If the robe is still unfinished, no chiasa panapuri, meaning it's being made, but crucially, there isn't enough material yet to complete it.
The original problem.
Exactly. In that situation, the monk is allowed to store it for masaparaman, which means up to a month.
Okay, so there's the month again.
But, and this is critical, that storage is specifically for the purpose of completing the unfinished part, and only if the monk still has that hope or expectation, paikasa, for more material to arrive.
So it ties back directly to that initial reason for the allowance.
Precisely. It's balancing the strict deadline with understanding practical limitations.
Got it. So what's the punchline? What happens if you go over that month, even if you are still hoping for material?
That's where the rule bites. The text says, Tato te utaria nikipea satyapi pakasaya, Nissaggiya pachetiante.
Which means?
If a monk keeps that robe for more than a month, even with that ongoing expectation, it results in Nissaggiya pakasaya.
And that is?
That's a grave offense. It involves two things. Forfeiture, you lose the robe, and expiation, some kind of confessional procedure to deal with the transgression.
Wow. So no excuses after a month. It's a really strong statement about accountability, isn't it? About not letting community resources just sit idle.
Absolutely. And what's truly remarkable is how much more detailed it gets from here, especially when you look at how they handled what's called a pakasakava, an expected or supplementary robe, depending on when it showed up relative to your main robe, the mulakavara.
Okay, so it's not just one rule, it interacts with other timings.
Exactly. There's this incredible sliding scale. For instance, if this expected supplementary robe arises on the same day as your main one, or even up to 10 days later, you still got that 10-day window to make it.
Okay, that seems consistent.
But watch how the deadline tightens. If that expected robe showed up, say, on the 11th day up to the 20th day after the main one, still 10 days to make it.
Still 10 days.
But if it arises on the 21st day, now you only have 9 days left.
Okay, shrinking.
If it shows up between the 22nd and the 26th day, that window slams down to just 4 days.
4 days.
And if it arrives between the 27th and 29th day, just one single day to get it done.
1 day. That's intense. And what if it arrives on the very last day, the 30th day?
Then it had to be dealt with immediately, either determined, ethically assigned for use, or allocated, perhaps to another monk, or just straight up given away.
That very day. No grace period.
That very day. No waiting until morning. Can you just imagine trying to track all these overlapping deadlines without, a Google Calendar?
Seriously. So the bottom line for the monk was, if you didn't handle that robe by dawn of the 31st day.
It was automatically Nissaggiya, forfeited, gone.
Wow, okay. And even the act of giving it up, the forfeiture itself, was formalized.
Oh, yes. There's a precise formula the monk had to use. Something like, this unseasonable robe of mine, venerable sir, having exceeded a month, is subject to forfeiture. I relinquish it to the sangha.
So very formal, very public almost. It really emphasizes that commitment to order and transparency you mentioned.
Definitely. And it doesn't stop there. The rules go on to detail exactly when you commit the full offense versus lesser offenses, or no offense at all.
Okay, so it's not just black and white.
Not entirely. It shows this focus on intent and circumstances. You commit the full Nissaggiya, Pasidya, forfeiture, and expiation if you go over the month and you know it, or even if you're just in doubt about it, or, get this, even if you mistakenly think you haven't exceeded the month.
Oh, so ignorance isn't really an excuse there.
Not for the full offense. Also, if you actually use a robe that should have been forfeited, but you haven't formally relinquished it yet.
Okay. What about lesser offenses?
There's a dukaya, a minor offense. That happens if you're actually within the month limit, but you mistakenly think you've gone over or you're in doubt. So the intention or mistaken belief matters there too.
Interesting. And when is there no offense at all? Anaphety.
Right. There's anapati, no offense if you correctly determine, allocate, or give the robe away within the month limit. That's the expected action.
Makes sense.
Also, no offense if the robe gets lost, destroyed, burned, or even stolen before the deadline. Things beyond the monk's control.
Practical exceptions.
And importantly, it also explicitly states the rule doesn't apply to someone considered insane, umatakasa, or to a complete beginner, adikambakasa, like a first offender still learning the ropes.
So there's some allowance for capacity and experience. That seems fair.
Yes, it shows they weren't completely rigid. And there's one more fascinating condition, just to show the nuance.
Go on.
The text adds, if a different kind of root robe arises, meaning you get a new main robe unexpectedly, and an expected robe, a supplementary one, arises, and there are still remaining nights within the month limit, one is not forced to make it the supplementary one immediately.
Huh. So if your primary situation changes, it affects the secondary deadlines.
It seems so.
Yeah.
It really suggests a deep, practical understanding of how complex real life can get, even within a monastery. It wasn't just a blind, unthinking system. They adapted.
So we've really gone deep into this incredibly specific, almost mind-bogglingly detailed monastic rule about robes and deadlines. Taking a step back, what really stands out to you about all this?
For me, it's how this seemingly niche regulation gives us such a profound glimpse into how these ancient communities grappled with really fundamental issues. Resource management, obviously, but also accountability, trust, and finding that tricky balance between, compassion for individual struggles and the discipline needed for a community to function.
Yeah, it's far more than just rules about cloth.
Exactly. This detailed Vinaya rule, it's ultimately about preventing hoarding, making sure shared resources get used efficiently, and building that foundation of trust within the Sangha. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the seemingly small details, like how long you hold on to fabric, can actually have pretty significant ripples for the health and integrity of the whole group.
It really makes you think about how societies, ancient or modern, encode their values and manage collective life through sometimes very granular regulations. Okay, so here's a final thought then for you listening to mull over. How do these challenges we've seen, managing resources, setting clear guidelines, dealing with expectations in ancient monastic life, how do they parallel the complexities we face today? Managing resources and expectations in our own lives, maybe in a family or a workplace or any kind of community.
Are there universal lessons, maybe?
Exactly. Are there universal lessons about human nature, about governance, about community living, sort of embedded in these rules that are millennia old? Something to think about.